Buckle up for AEC Trailblazers, the Founders Files, where we crack open the stories of the brightest minds in the AEC startup scene. Forget institutional pitches. We're diving deep into the real personal journeys of these industry disruptors. Get ready for some casual chats firsthand.
Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of the AC Trailblazers podcast, where we interview the most amazing founders of the AC. Today with us, we have Alexander Josephson. He was born in Toronto, Canada. Alex studied architecture at the University of Waterloo and in Rome. He co-founded Partisans in 2012 after dropping out of the Architectural Association School of Architecture in 2011. Alex is the only Canadian to have received the New York Prize Fellowship at the Van Allen Institute. He was named Best Emerging Designer by Canada's Design Exchange, Best Emerging Practice Awards from the Ontario Association of Architects, and Royal Architecture Institute of Canada. And under his leadership, the firm has won design awards globally as well as commissions like the Orbit Innisfil, hopefully I pronounced that right, and the Hearn, which is the largest decommissioned power plant in North America. He's an adjunct professor of the University of Toronto's Daniels Faculty of Architecture, and he's a registered architect in Ontario. In 2023, he raised venture capital to seed Cumulus, an immersive next generation memorization platform. Alex, that was an impressive and long bio. So, welcome to the show.
I got through it though. We made it.
Yeah, we did it. We did it. There were some names there that I didn't know. I was sure it was pronouncing it right,
You
but
did a great job. Nice to meet you,
no,
Valentin. And thanks for
yeah,
having me
nice
on the
meeting
show.
you
And from up here in cold Toronto, I say hello.
too. You can come and visit Miami and get a little bit of warm anytime you want, man.
Yeah, I'd like to. I have a lot of friends there, and it feels like the entire world is really starting to look at Miami in a serious way, and it's interesting to watch it sort of bend and buckle under the weight of the immigration that's occurring there from other states in the United States and uh, even world, really. Like the amount of Canadians down there is extraordinary.
Yeah, it was just insane actually. Like I remember when it was not that expensive, there were not that many construction sites, and suddenly it's like booming, and it's like people realize, oh, we have a city in our country that it's in the Caribbean, good weather. Why not moving there?
Good
So it's
taxes.
yeah, yeah. Um, but before we deep dive into uh, why why are you doing what you're doing, I'm just curious. And you're an architect. How you decided, like long time ago, to be an architect?
So it's a funny story. The reality is it was a love story. I drew a castle for my first crush. I think I was 6 or 7 years old, and I guess I was a more visual kid, and I resonated with building things with my hands. I wasn't an academic. I wasn't a fast learner even as a kid, but I could draw and I could use my hands. And I loved Lego. Obviously, it's very cliched, but I drew a castle for this girl I had a crush on, and I drew it in section, not in 3D, not in elevation, but I drew it in section with like the rooms and everything we were doing in it, and anyway, so I think I was 7, and basically, I think my mother or my father. My mother was a is a good artist. She studied design at Parsons actually, and my father loves art. He's a scientist, but they told me that they were like, "Do you know what who draws buildings?" And it was an architect, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And it became clear after I thought that was so neat, that name and buildings, castles, architect, and I kind of just stuck with me. And what I realized is that no one in Canada wanted to be an architect. I didn't meet anybody who was an architect. My parents didn't have any friends who were architects, and it kind of felt rare, special, and it felt like I could create an identity with it. And I liked it, and I liked drawing, and I liked making things. So that was the beginning of it. But then, when I think my parents and other people in my family realized I was serious about it, even my teachers in high school, when I was becoming much more academically uh, inclined in grade 10, 11, um, everybody started to discourage me from being an architect. And I went to the funeral of a very famous woman in Canada, and she had friends who were architects, and they were famous architects in Canada actually at the time. And I think I was about 12 at the time, maybe I was 11. And I remember this man who was a very successful architect in Canada. It would have been 1990s, early 90s. There was a big recession happening, and he said, "You don't want to be an architect." And everybody's saying, "Don't be an architect. It's like becoming an actor," or and then I realized, oh, if I say I want to be an architect, that's rebellious. So then it was not just like it didn't just feel like I was a kind of, I felt like I had an identity with it because no one else wanted to do it, but it was rebellious. And so instead of my high school years being about drugs and alcohol and sex and all these things and rebellion, my rebellion was architecture. So that's just the truth of it.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it's a more healthy way of being rebellious, right?
It's funny because I spent a long time in Italy, a very long time, and there are more architects in Italy than lawyers, probably. Like it's one of the most popular things to study because it's a general education, not just a design education. And obviously, in Europe, being an architect is, in many countries, it's a prolific thing to study. Very popular, sorry, not prolific. And so it just speaks to how conservative Canada is, really, at least the way it was in the 90s and 80s when I grew up. And whereas today, I think there's a stature and a I think a greater sort of prominence of architects. I think that when I was growing up, it wasn't.
True. And I mean, I agree. My mother is Italian, so I have spent a lot of time in Italy as well. And
Eccola,
true,
ci
there's a lot
siamo.
of ah, parla
Sì, parlo
Alexander, parla.
quasi bene. Ho dimenticato,
Io non
ho
parlo molto
dimenticato
bene,
proprio
ma
tutto, ma sto praticando.
bene, bene.
Yeah.
No, interesting. Yeah, we should have done this the whole thing in Italian, and that would have been better, right?
Dammi 3 mesi e così posso migliorare e poi facciamo in italiano.
Eh? Sì, io parlo piano piano. eh, può essere,
In the
può
meantime,
essere.
in the meantime, our English guests are like, "What are you guys talking about? It's broken Italian."
Yeah. But we
Yeah,
just throw in random words.
but that's how I got to
But
architecture. That's the story. Yeah,
interesting. And I mean, at the beginning, you were, because we know what you're doing now, and we're going to speak about that later, and you're more interconnected and related with technology. But when you first started, it was also a passion about technology, or you were just, you know what, I want to be a designer, I want to do these famous buildings, or what you were thinking when you became an architect.
I didn't know about any of that. They didn't really exist until the. I don't know. I didn't. I wasn't surrounded by it. My parent. I had to sort of convince my parents to buy me architecture books, and I just wasn't surrounded by the celebrity of architecture that was occurring in Europe and the United States. Canada is kind of an isolated place, and I think that speaks to our sensibility, but also the fact that until recently we haven't asserted ourselves from a cultural perspective or political perspective on the global stage. But I think there's a window right now where Canadians are doing so, especially in the wake of what's happening globally. But I think we have good values to export, but also extraordinary experiences of nature and culture is that offer an architectural response to the world that's unique. So I think that, like, none of that mattered really. It was something I just genuinely enjoyed. Obviously, later when you get older and you start to read the news or you read books or you meet more people and you travel, you start to learn about the celebrity and these other elements of architecture that today we're kind of grappling with as a profession. But I think, you know, the idea that you were going to be some kind of um, rock star, you know, I thought it was rebellious. I didn't think it was something that you were going to have much of an audience for. I thought maybe I
Yeah, I
could make
mean,
a living doing it. Maybe I thought I could be make an honest. I could do an honest day's work. You know, my parents worked very hard. I work very hard. That's really just the basic reality of it, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the term starchitect, right, is the term they use to, right, the combination of star and architect that they basically use right now for, these famous Birkingels, Saha, you name it. But I think it's a new thing. It was not used not be like that. At least when I started architecture, it was not that way. And it was
But
more about
everybody,
buildings, not that
but,
much
but
about the architect.
everybody in every field became celebrities. This idea, I think
Sure,
that architects are
sure.
extraordinarily arrogant and navel gazing. There's famous star doctors, there's famous star scientists, there's famous star engineers, there's famous entrepreneurs, there's famous singers, there's famous dancers. We live in uh, a postmodern age of the ecstasy of communication. Every field has its celebrities, even if they're micro celebrities. So this idea that architecture has digested the celebrity era is just, it's a joke to me. I've seen some stuff happening online on Dezeen and stuff like this that, oh, we should look at the starchitect era and put it behind us. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, we didn't create it. The world celebrates talents. Now, they also celebrate groups of talents. They celebrate groups of musicians. They celebrate groups of people that run companies. You don't have to celebrate just one person, but like, I think this idea that architecture created starchitects. We didn't create starchitects. The world created starchitects, and you're not going to take that. I find it just sort of. I find it so funny how detached architecture is from reality, in this sense that we espouse that we're in control of these things, and it's like, you're no more in control of who gets celebrated as an architect in architecture than you are on climate change. Like, this idea that we have really got control over these things. It's fascinating to watch because I come from Canada. I come from Ontario, and where I come from, Quebec and Ontario have the greenest power grids in the world. So when we make aluminum in Quebec, it's the lowest embodied carbon aluminum in the world. It's made with hydroelectric dams. When we manufacture something here, it's the lowest intensivity of carbon in the world because of the nuclear and hydroelectric power. This idea that I find architecture right now quite lost, because I don't think there's the kind of specificity required to have a productive discussion. There's this kind of one size fits all solution about how every architect has to behave and what every architect thinks. And I think that is problematic. There's much more going on than that. And the world's a complex place. And if you don't look at the complexity and you don't look at it in a very objective way and a non-ideological way, then it gets very confusing very quickly. But we're not here to talk about politics. But I did call partisans and not PB and J when I started Partisans. I had a partner at the time, and our initials would have spelled peanut butter and jam as an acronym. So we didn't go with PB and J. We were very interested. We talked about politics. We talked about the relevance of architecture to political discourse, but we also talked about how architecture was a manifestation of a culture's values in a physical form. And so we picked the name Partisans because we felt it was charged with meaning and value, and it had a cause. You know, partisans fight for something; they fight for a cause, and
Mm.
um, so I like to believe that we're trying to pursue things in a way where we extract as much from an opportunity as possible, and are able to bring a cultural and technological and crafted response at all scales. And I think that um, that's kind of in a nutshell where we started. But it came from being from very diverse places: Iran, Canada, spending time in Europe, in Rome for a very long time, um, working for Massimiliano Fuchs, and 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 seeing what the Italian sensibility was. And it's such an extraordinary culture.
Interesting. Oh, I mean, I think it's important. Like when you're doing architecture, it's like it's. I feel that in any other field where there is art involved, right? Because it's partially art, right? It's so important to be inspired by multiple cultures. That and you have seen it on any architect who appreciates the art, right? They travel and you go to Europe. I mean, every time I go to Europe or any of those places, for me, it's just
Well, did you
insane,
study
right?
architecture? What's your story?
Yeah. What's my story?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
in the audience already know, but my background is architecture, but I learned how to code when I was 12.
Ah,
So so I always been in the and my family they have a my grandfather was had a construction company. He was an engineer. My mother, she's an architect. My whole family is in the architecture
okay, okay.
realm.
So you
But
come by it honestly.
what? Yeah, yeah. I mean,
You were
it was at
indoctrinated.
first it was like I am sure I'm going to study this just because my family are doing this. But then in the end, I never, to be honest, I never ended up being a designer. I just, even when I was at college, I was selling at university, I was selling algorithms to my teachers on how to automate 3ds Max. That was my deal. And as soon as I was out of college, I had my first company doing gaming, architectural gaming assets.
Interesting.
Right now you can do it with AI, but in the past,
Are you are
games
you are
needed,
you are
the
you are
background.
you coding today? Are you still working in coding
I still code, yeah,
and
yeah.
gaming?
Well, I manage more than code. I sold that company, and nowadays we do automation mostly for data centers, microchip factories, and those kind of like complex buildings, hospitals. We work also with a couple of architects on specific algorithms, um, and most of the times I just bring the idea and I don't code that much, but I still do it for fun.
Interesting. I'd love to talk more about it on another occasion.
Absolutely, but yeah, and that's why I feel I agree with what you said about architecture. It's not just one big thing, and we all do the same. For me, it was applying the knowledge on how I can automate the buildings, and my friends used to tell me, "You're not an architect," and I'm like, "I am an architect. It's just that I'm not a
Yeah,
designer.
yeah.
It's just
In fact,
you know."
when I started Partisans. I came back from Italy and working in the United States, uh, and, uh, and basically, like, I had to start from scratch, and all of my time working for architects was erased because policies changed. Um, so I basically had to start my internships from scratch in Canada. I would have lost like 5 years of my life, and I said, you know what? I'm not going to allow them to take the best years of my life away from me. And I just started anyways. I didn't call myself an architect because it was illegal to call yourself an architect, even though I had 3 degrees in architecture. Plus, I dropped out of a fourth degree in architecture, and I started teaching, and I started Partisans with my former partner, and we found a partner eventually who had a license, and we got by. But the it's very hard when the profession is saying, like, if you studied for 8 years, you can't call yourself an architect, but at the same time, they don't protect architects. So I find what's going on right now in the profession kind of interesting to watch, because there's a bit of an identity crisis happening, because architects around the world, especially in England, are becoming very vocal about how much you invest to become an architect and how little you get in return unless you are a very, very successful entrepreneur. Um, and and I'm trying my best to try and actually be entrepreneurial at Partisans, and build value through endeavors we that we build in the business with technology, that maybe there's some future equity we can um, we can benefit from as a windfall later. But I think it is a debate right now. You know, what's the value of calling yourself that if you can't make a living, and only a few can? So like, either they stop graduating architects like 90%, so that the people who do graduate can charge more for their services, or there has to be structural changes to labor in the field. And that's an interesting discussion. That's a very interesting discussion. But we're not here to talk about
No,
that. We're here
absolutely.
to talk about technology.
Well, I mean, it's part of it, so
Yeah.
don't worry. But yeah, we can deep dive a little bit on when you founded Partisans. For you, technology from the beginning was an important thing, or it was just it's just a tool, and I don't care
Yeah.
about that
No,
much.
it's central. I think that it's very important. Um, there's people tend to want to reduce importance to one thing. It's like, oh, some people are technologists, um, some people are materialists, some people are dogmatic, some people, like, I don't believe that the greatest architecture firms are just one speed. You have to develop technology to um, make what you're designing possible to build or bring into the world. And I think the best example of that is, like Frank Gehry, who, built Gehry Technologies and leveraged Dassault systems to build his own technologies. I mean, today we have, when McNeil and Rhino came out, it made all that sort of way less relevant, because you were able suddenly to combine 3D scanning and NURBS modeling and spline and T spline modeling, in that environment, without having to do what they did with Dassault anymore. But there's still a place for that, and in a kind of mass customized uh, context of manufacturing, designed for manufacturing and assembly, for example. The tolerances required for those situations are very high. But like, technology for us, as much as we're artists and thinkers and cultural enthusiasts, um, technology was what we used to leverage on all projects to achieve our ends. So we were always experimental with the technology, whether it was coding. It's the same thing as a pencil in my mind. We still use pencils and markers, and I draw a lot still. There's almost every project is a collage and a drawing to start, but in combination with farming a lot of data and gathering a lot of data. And I don't think that our process is necessarily. I think everybody has their own processes, but we tend to want to collect a lot of data first and learn from it. But an example, one of our first projects, we were using T splines um, before really anybody else was. It was a plugin for Rhino in 2010, or 2011, I think it came out. And that was what we designed the Grotto Sauna with. And that was our first project, one of our first projects. There were a couple of others. Like, I did a temporary mosque for my thesis that we also used Rhino to develop in 2008. But we were always experimenting, but not for the sake of the technology, but rather to achieve our means of us and our leanings towards sort of an organic solution to complex problems. And I always said that it seems to me the first thing I experienced after graduating from architecture school was that everybody was asking for extraordinarily complex solutions for complex requirements. And they would say, "Oh, yeah, but I don't want a spaceship." And it's like, well, what you're asking for is so complex that it is a spaceship, and only a spaceship can solve for that complexity. I mean, I'm being metaphorical, right? But
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
seemed to me that technology was simply just another tool that you had to master, just in the same way that architects mastered using pencils and pens and rulers and tables and Autodesk. The automatic desk was like, this was
Yeah.
a manual analog name, right? And I find that fascinating, right?
Yeah.
And that's what that was. It was a desk that had pivots and it had rulers, and it was an automatic desk, and that was a game changer to drawing without those things. And it increased production, and it changed the way architecture looked, even just by dint of having these rulers and compasses and so I think that, like, technology doesn't have to necessarily control you. You can bend it as well. Um, and for example, when we designed that first project, we didn't know how it was going to be built. We showed the client; they were like, "How can you build this?" And we were like, "Sure, of course we can." We had no idea how to build it. We had no idea. And so the translation between what technology gives you and the fact that you still have to mediate that with human hands and fingers still is a very important thing for us. It's a very important thing. And then, at Union Station in Toronto, we were a friend of ours was doing the branding and positioning for Union Station, the largest uh, transit hub in Canada. It went under a $1 billion renovation that took 14 years, 15 years. Um, yeah, it took a long time. And we do things slowly in Canada. It's speeding up now, but it was a slow start. But we realized they were doing everything in 2D CAD for this huge, massive project, and we said to the client, "Hey, if you give us the interior fit out scope, we can do this in BIM with a team of graduates from the university here for for nothing, and you'll be ahead of the game and know all the problems on the project." And they gave us the design mandate because we gave them a technological solution for at the time what was cheap because we were all graduates. Um, but I think you can use technology in interesting ways. You can use it to further your aesthetics. You can also use it to position yourself to achieve something more efficiently than someone else can, which gives you a mandate for design. Um, so it's interesting. Like, my relationship with technology is maybe it also comes from the relationship I have had with architects that I've collaborated with that saw technology and innovation of technology as being central to being a successful architect.
No, absolutely. And I feel what you're saying is really interesting because the fact that true sometimes technology can basically modify your design, right? Because it allows you to do stuff that nobody have previously done, right? Like you said, Gary Technologies, the paper, and then they scan the paper in 3D, and we're able to translate the shape into a building. But then I feel it's also the other way around, right? Suddenly you have more technology, and suddenly you can think on different ways of designing, right? And then it's like the chicken and egg,
Well, there was a
right?
big
Like
leap.
like you
There,
said, it's
there
like
was a there was a big leap. There was no modeling software that existed. Rhino didn't exist in the 80s, right? It didn't exist. So you had
yeah,
to build things out of paper, and then you had to figure out how to get the points of the paper into the technology. And so you had to figure out a scanning technology that then put the points into the technology, into the software, and then the points could be used to then build structures that were. It was just about being pretty close to what those points were of the model. Whereas today it's the opposite. You can make almost any shape. The question is, how do you translate that shape into the built form? And it's funny, like, the act of making a model forced them to sort of think about how it would be built while you made the physical model, because you had to fashion it with your hands and it had to stand up and it needed to stay in the same place on the table while they scanned it, or else the model would get all screwed up, right? Whereas today we have
Yeah.
infinite possibilities inside of Grasshoppers, Rhino interface, and others. And so the question is, how do you spin that down versus spin it up? And it's actually a big problem, because like you're a lot of the time we're designing in Rhino and you're expressing these very ambitious formal solutions to problems on your projects, but then you have to bring it into Revit, which is a very particular animal, and so you have to develop software to customize that approach, and because the off the shelf stuff doesn't really work that well. You have to kind of customize it, and that process, and then like, okay, well, how is that built? Who's going to do it? Where's the manufacturer? And so like you find yourself in a situation where doing ambitious things either has to cost an extraordinary amount of money and time, or you have to have really great relationships with fabricators that understand how to translate that technological design solution into atoms, like into matter that is stand for hundreds of years. So I think that's a very fascinating problem to work through on a daily basis. And in our office, we're developing our own. We've always developed our own tools. We've developed our own scripts for as long as I can remember. One of the first things we did a script for in 2012 or 2011 was everybody was buying restoration hardware catalogs. Restoration hardware, and everybody was
Yeah.
buying these tufted leather couches. It was like they were the coolest things in the world, and I was like, I'm sitting here designing contemporary architecture, and yet everybody, even my parents, have these restoration hardware catalogs on their counter. They've sent me to school for these decades to learn architecture and contemporary design, but everybody wants classicism. And so we start to look at how we could develop our own language using Grasshopper to do tufted leather geometry on any surface, to script textures. And so textures became very important to our company. And then that brings into the question, well, where is ornament in architecture? Where is texture in architecture? Why does it matter? Should it be allowed to exist? And in a world where we live in a non-dogmatic uh, moment in architecture where anything goes, uh, the question is, what is the narrative? What's the value of that? And so we started with tufted leather, and we recreated that as a script, and so we could do anything tufted, and we called the script Tufted, because you could tuft anything. And then we did a whole scripted city. Innisfil was scripted. It goes on and on and on, but the initial idea for Innisfil was actually a Rorschach, kind of like a garden city response to an agricultural grid in Ontario, and we use scripting to develop the fabric of it. We've always built our own tools, but they always were at service to our sort of conceptual approaches to things. It wasn't tool first, concept from it. I'm sure there's many people who can do that, but that's not how we operate. And then, inevitably, we just always had our own technology group, and um, and then that kind of, it applied on so many projects, and it just helped us, I think, bring something different to our clients, even in terms of like facades. We've developed facade optimization tools, so we can actually analyze the number of different panels that we're designing for a facade, even if it's organic. So is it kind of like taking the responsibility for what you drew? The tools allow you, and the technology allows you to say, I didn't just draw this fancy thing. I know every component of it. and I can control it, and I can tell you exactly how many pieces there are here, and I know what it's going to cost because I already talked to the fabricator over here, and we know what is here because of the scripts we wrote to define this facade. And I think that that's empowering for architects because the industry is basically set up so that contractors look at architects and go, oh, fancy drawing. How do you build it? And it's like, well, the typical relationship is, well, here's the drawing, here's the intent, you tell me how you want to build it. Well, it's like, no, 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 because then they go, well, you're crazy, and they don't want to, they don't have the same interests, right? They want to deliver
Yeah.
the least for the most money. You want to deliver the most for the least money. so,
True.
so,
Yeah.
so the alignment is totally non-existent between that relationship, and it will never be aligned. It just isn't. And I think that that is core to the difference between an architect and a builder and an artist. There's all these sort of differences. Um, but I think in this current context, I don't know if you have a question about it, but like that's my response to that. But we haven't even talked about AI, and we haven't talked about how do you be
Well, I mean,
entrepreneurial with it.
yeah, I mean, I, I, I do things, and we can speak about that as well. And I always love the example of Sagrada Familia, right? Sagrada Familia, I think, is one of the few buildings that was conceived 100 years ago, but then the technology is being used to build it is getting up to date. So it's just interesting, and you can see how it all started and how is it doing now with all the prefab on the top. So I do feel that it's one of the few examples in the world that you can actually see live technology being, being adapted to the design, right? To
Yeah,
design intent over the years.
I think that that's a great example, and I have some connection to that because I worked for Philip Beasley in 2003, and we were the Smart Geometry Conference occurred in Canada in Toronto at Waterloo, at the University of Waterloo in 2003, and it was a watershed event because you had Neri Oxman, you had Philip Beasley, you had Mark Burry, you had the guys who were doing Acadia. It was an extraordinary moment in computation and architecture, really, that Waterloo Smart Geometry Conference, because it was this nexus of people, and the people who were doing the Sagrada Familia out of Melbourne. I can't remember it. Yeah, it's out of Melbourne. The architect who was using computational design strategies to evolve and bring to life the unbuilt Gaudi, right? And the original models and techniques were discussed at that conference. They were lost wax models. And this was like the dawn of 3D printing and stuff. It was an extraordinary moment.
Yeah.
So maybe that also infected me because I was surrounded by that milieu. But I was always more cultural. I was more interested in the conceptual, phenomenological, and drawn approach to the idea and kernel versus starting at the technology to solve for a problem. Um, and I think that just speaks to my own sensibility and not necessarily what's possible in the field, right?
No, absolutely. But I do think, I mean, things are speeding up. That's a reality. If you measure the last 100 years, or if you measure the last 500 years, like, things are speeding up, and it's a reality, and things are gonna change, no, whether you like it or not. And sure, like, digital and design is going faster because it's easier, right? It's easier to automate a model than to actually prefab or 3D printing concrete. Like, people are trying to do it, but not in a large scale efficient way. But it's getting better as well, and eventually it will catch up, right? Eventually the physical
It's a
world
second
will catch up.
it's a
Things are
second
going to change so
revolution.
much.
It's a second
Yeah.
revolution. Like you're talking about the same kind of revolution that occurred in the 80s with computation, like just computers and architecture. Um, 80s and 90s where just drafting disappeared. You're going to see a complete shift in the way architecture is practiced because of artificial intelligence. And I don't mean just, I think the design process, yes, you're going to see more prompting. But people aren't talking about also the conceptualization and the AI's use for writing. It's very powerful for writing. It's more powerful, arguably, for writing and conceptualizing that way than it is generating form right now, because it's so biased by certain architectures because of the training models. And so we're obviously building our own LoRa models and our own training models on our own images. But we're at the dawn of the age of either an incredible and exciting future, or something that might be, you know, might have some pretty scary components to it. Obviously, that's what revolution brings. It's uncertainty, but by engaging in the technology really intimately, we just have a way of discovering things with it, and those discoveries have been fruitful so far. We have a team that's dedicated to. We have a big team. We have a big computational team, but it's not a team that is isolated from the design process. Our design innovation lead is a project architect, and he's involved in all facets of computation at our office. We have people who love working in Grasshopper. We have people who love scripting in Python and Grasshopper. We have people who code in all the native platforms to the AI, which is true for uh, writing, but also image generation. Um, and we're designing with AI. Like we're already doing that. And the question is it helpful? It is, and it isn't. Um, it is, and it isn't. There's certain processes that it accelerates and does a way better job at it. Visualization is a good example, because you can pretty much control right now very well the output of rendering using AI. So I think that the big disruption has occurred in rendering. The big disruptions occurred in clients bringing you prompted images already. But I think that goes back to the old adage. It costs $10 for me to design it for you. It costs $100 million if you want me to watch you design it. Like
Yeah.
so.
But but I do feel it's gonna be like, and I love to see how other industries are doing, right? And I do feel it's gonna be something that is happening with accountants, for example, right? Accountants nowadays, like in the US, when you have to do taxes, right? You're a regular person, right? Not a, you don't have a company or anything. You do your own taxes, or AI does your taxes for you, because it's a simple thing that can be automated. And I do feel that to a
Well, this
certain
is the thing.
extent, at the same,
Simple things, discrete things can be automated, but architecture as a
correct.
whole, it's far too complex and far too specific in the context that I work in architecture. I think that the big
But your
firms,
scale, because you're in a different scale, not
uh,
small houses, right?
no, I do towers, master
Correct.
plans, all sorts. But I
Correct.
think to that point, if you're a big architecture firm that does very, very commodified work, volume work, you're in big trouble, because all this stuff is good at is repetitive, commodified behaviors. So if you're working in a commodified uh, space, I think it's very dangerous. I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure even on the bespoke architecture, because it's going to make ideating and that image easier to produce with nothing, without any talent. So I think it elevates the mediocre mind. Um, I think that the 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 run diffusion, the I, what it does is allow someone to say something in words. So if you're a very good writer but a terrible designer, you can make an architecture that's very alluring and complex, and that's an inversion, right? Like it's actually like a moment where an English graduate, someone who's got a very keen ability to describe something in detail, is going to be very successful. And one of the people I admire the most, Arturo Tedeschi, my friend, who's a world-renowned computational innovator. People don't know this about him, but he wanted to be a writer, and he's a phenomenal writer. And the reason he's so good at computational design, and especially the AI, is he's an extraordinary narrator. He's deft at describing things, and if you're a very good linguist, your ability to control AI is exponentially greater than someone who doesn't. Architects who have no ability to describe what they want are in big, big, big trouble, because it's going to come down to how well you can describe what you want. Now, I think generating things, that's that side. Visualizing things, those tools, I think the tools happening in visualization are disruptive, right? You're going to be, you can create animations, you can create renderings that are quite easily controlled if you have a model that's detailed enough. Um, so that it's, I know I have some friends who are visualizers, and they've had to pivot their entire business and lay 80% of their staff off and rethink it completely. So the disruption is here, the revolution is here. The question is, how do you make the most of it? You can't be defensive, you have to be offensive, you have to use it. um, I find it laughable that there are these people calling themselves AI architects. You know, the idea that they didn't step in at any point to control what the AI gave them. That's so dishonest, because there's no, like, you have to step in. The architect must step in, because the AI right now is just simply not powerful enough. And so this idea that the AI is doing everything, it's not true. It does some things, but it doesn't do it all. And it certainly doesn't do it consistently or accurately yet. So this idea of calling yourself that, it's a marketing technique. And it's very clever, I guess, as a marketing technique for clients who think that that's interesting. But I don't know how many clients are all that sophisticated about it. But I guess it's a trend right now. But I think like in the context of being entrepreneurial, you have to be aggressive with the technology. And so, like, for example, how we were aggressive with technology was, could we use computational design for a purely commercial, and you were in gaming design, right? Um,
Yeah.
so Cumulus is really the gamification of memorial data. So, like, you could argue the primal purpose of architecture as a profession was either to build shelter or memorials. The oldest surviving structures are tombs. so so it's
True.
fascinating, right? And naturally, I've always been interested in this, but my father asked me to design his grave because he was fighting cancer, and he got a very bad case of COVID, and he survived. But I developed this idea for a digital cemetery, a digital memorial platform based on generative design and computational principles that create a cloud, an immersive experience around your data, and a space where you put your most important digital assets. And I think the potential for architects to either create prosperity for ourselves or be entrepreneurial in technology is strong. We don't have to be victims. We can be leaders, and we raised venture capital uh, to build that business, and we're launching across several dozen cemeteries and funeral homes in the United States. And it may not be, the sexiest topic, but there's nothing more certain in life than death and taxes. And
True.
and I think that architects, in the context of AI and technology and computation, it has to go beyond just alluring surfaces and flowy buildings. Like, you have to do it for a reason. It has to serve a purpose. It has to either tell a particular story to solve a particular problem, or it has to serve some bigger purpose. Otherwise, it's just waste, and you're just a victim of the tech. So I guess that's my parting word.
I think it's a great way of finishing this, and I love the way you see things are going, um, and certainly things are gonna change, and you're the master of your own future, right? And you need to decide whether you wanna just stay where you are and see how it goes, or actually, you know, take technology, use it, and change the way you work. It's up to you, but it's gonna happen whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I know we're running out of time, and I do appreciate this conversation was really interesting. But before we say goodbye to each other, it would be great if you can tell everybody where they can know more about you or Cumulus um, or anything you do, actually.
That's first of all, it's almost like you could talk about this for 2 hours. So I'm happy to. We should have another. We should have another session. But if you'd like to see more about Partisans' work, we're at partisans.com, and on Instagram, Partisan Architecture, and Alexander Josephson on Instagram, and Cumulus is cumulus.world. And Cumulus has been featured in the Globe and Mail, Fast Company, and other sources of news. And it's a free platform. There's a subscription as well if you want the higher functionality. But check out Cumulus like the cloud. We all want to go to heaven. Cumulus.world. And that's our manifestation of how architects can find prosperity through technology that we use to build other things besides bricks. We can use them to design bytes.
I agree. I 100% agree. Thanks so much for your time, Alex. This has been great, and looking forward to seeing more about Partisans or Cumulus. Right?
And I'm looking forward to seeing you in Miami where it's warm.
Yeah. Whenever you want, let me know, and we can grab a mojito or something.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, man. Thanks so much for your time. Have a great day.
You too, Valentin. Thanks. Be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to our listeners. If you like this content, you can find past and upcoming episodes in ascworks.everse.com and at all of our Everse social media. We'd love to hear from you and recommendations for new content, so leave us a DM and we'll make sure to catch it.